if it works at all. Oh, here we go. So good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Hoyes. I'm the co-chair of the Professionalism and Workforce Strategy Group with the lovely Verity. She's down at the bottom of the country. I'm somewhere in the Midlands, not north, I hasten to add, because it's definitely not north. And if you live near me, you'll understand why I say that. But over in the other part of the country too. So we're going to talk about the early childhood graduate practitioner competencies today. As I said, I've collated some of your FAQs prior, but didn't capture some of the ones that came through yesterday, and I might have missed some. So any questions we can go over at the end. So we're going to think about what this new framework, some of the changes in there, answer those questions and have that chance for discussion. So as you'll have kind of seen from the newsletter that we sent out, the rationale, well, firstly, it was quite timely. It was spurred on by those big changes to the QAA benchmarks, I believe, in 2022. So we wanted to make sure we were fully up to date. And it was also time to do it. And what Verity and I were quite keen to do was making sure that the framework itself moved beyond kind of technical competence. And so in doing that, we really wanted to emphasise the role of values, because they were there in that original iteration, but we wanted to make sure they were really explicit in the role that values played in shaping that knowledge and practices that we expect of our early childhood graduates. So we really saw it as kind of strengthening that graduateness, I think is the word we use, isn't it, Verity? That graduateness of our early childhood degrees. So we wanted to kind of really emphasise those ethical, relational and those rights-based dimensions of practice, which were in those original iterations. We just wanted to strengthen them. And thinking about, you know, the work that we do requiring kind of principled judgment, critical thinking and a commitment to equity, inclusion and social justice. So all of the things that we know we do and we do well, but we wanted to strengthen them and make them much more explicit. So in doing so and drawing in those QAA benchmarks, we really wanted to, renew or increase that focus on a couple of key areas. So the first was that interdisciplinary nature of the degrees, because it pulls from every kind of all of those different, health, social care, psychology, education. And one thing Eunice has always been really clear on, this is much more than just working in a nursery. The graduate practitioner competencies are much bigger than that. This is for all of the professions that surround early childhood. So whether that's in children's centres, in auxiliary health roles, whatever it might be, those competencies are broad. And so we kind of really wanted to kind of strengthen that element of it as well. So you'll know, because some of the feedback we got from the consultation was that some of them overlapped or felt a bit repetitive, and we tried to address that a little bit, but actually it's interconnected, it's interrelated. So some of them still feel a little bit like you've got some elements in competency 1 or somewhere else, because actually that's kind of the nature of the beast. So it's that kind of interdisciplinary element of it. Also, based on some of the QAA benchmarks and the feedback from yourselves, was also about strengthening sustainable development, because that was a key feature of the QAA benchmarks, equality, diversity and advocacy, and also around students receiving that explicit preparation for the complex, reflexive professional roles, including understanding their own well-being, they're developing their reflective capacity, but also that emotional labour awareness. And that was outlined in the QAA, talked about generic skills, and it talks about early childhood studies graduates are expected to be able to demonstrate empathy, active listening skills, and develop strategies to protect against burnout from emotional labour. And I think that was great that that was in there, because actually we know that the nature of the work is really kind of emotionally charged. So we wanted to strengthen some of those elements as well. So the actual kind of rationale for why we have the GPCs remains the same. I imagine that's really tiny on your screen, but you can find it in the booklet, and I'm not going to read it all to you, but it's on there. Those we didn't change those. Those were the rationale for why we had them. And really, in essence, it's about strengthening the degrees that we have and helping to create that strong graduate-led workforce. Also, in the update, we included the full and relevant criteria for degrees, and that's pulled from the DFE website itself. So there are links in there. So if you've got any kind of worries or concerns about that, always follow those links, because the book has been made And it's important that you also keep on top of the links in case there are any other changes, that they're also there for you. So in part one, then, we worked hard to streamline requirements as we could. We tried harder to kind of group elements, try to address things that have cropped up over the years that kind of were perhaps less clear. But one of the big changes, and this is based on feedback, lots of conversations at exec, is around that change to placement observation. So observation is a requirement. It's a requirement for full and relevant, and it's a requirement for the GPCs. But we do know that it puts a lot of financial pressure onto HEIs. And one of the biggest reason often people say we can't do the GPCs is because of that kind of costly requirement that it entails. So after lots of kind of back and forth, lots of playing with words, as you can imagine, because we do like words in academia, don't we? We kind of landed on this aspect that it could be mentors and or HEI staff. Now, we kind of caveated that a little bit. So hopefully we'd hope that mentors would be graduate led, but we also know the difficulty of that. So mentors should be graduate and or someone with significant experience and training relevant for early childhood studies. And the big thing is that as HEIs, we are responsible for ensuring that they are able to do that, able to support those students. And that is really going to kind of be the crux of getting that shift right. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the FAQs as we go through. So in part two, all of the 9 competencies remained the same, and that was intentional because we didn't want to create rafts of work. We know you're all very busy people, and also we felt at the crux of it, those 9 could capture what we needed them to capture. The brilliant Matt Northall, don't know if anyone knows him from Nottingham, did a great job of putting this together, didn't he, Verity? Couldn't have done it without him. But you'll notice we've got the 9, he even created the sort of images and logos for us, which feel a little bit sustainable developmental goals, don't they? So it's quite nice. And you'll also notice we changed the wheel, that's a technical term, to encompass knowledge, values and practices, because based from our feedback and our consultation, those were that was the wording that we sort of chose as a collective. So knowledge, practices and values. So how that looked in practice then. So as I said, all 9 remained the same, but we broke them down and we have expanded them. Now, I'll talk about this again in a moment. They do look like more. There's no getting away from that. You know, if you flick through, we have expanded them. But what I don't want you to do is panic, because in essence, they're very much still the same. What we've done is make them really explicit. We've tried to align them much more closely in terms of their language and terminology to the QAA benchmarks, in terms of kind of international frameworks that we've looked at. So the intention here isn't that it's created more work, it's that it's made it more explicit what you are already doing, and we'll talk about that as we go through. So that's kind of the new layout. You'll also notice that across all 9 values, all 9 competencies, the values are the same. So those core values are, let me read from mine. I've written this down as I get it wrong. So the early childhood graduate practitioner is an advocate for babies and young children's rights and participation, and recognises that babies and young children are active co-constructors of their own learning. They critically apply high-level academic knowledge and pedagogy and research evidence to the holistic development of babies and young children in a practice context that is respectful of the child, their family and community. So you'll also notice as well, we've really put babies front and centre alongside this, which I think is really important, particularly given those big changes that we've also seen. So we'll stop sort of some of those changes, and now I'll go through some general FAQs and then we'll keep going through. So in terms of this new framework, I can't read and chat, so I'll let Verity keep an eye on the chat because that will throw me. In terms of the new framework, you can teach the old one out. So we're not expecting anything radical. We have very much been mindful of your workloads and what you've already got going on. So we think these can be taught out as you want to using the older version. You can kind of finish that off, and it will remain available until July 2028. We encourage you to use it as soon as you are ready, but it's very much an institutional decision as to how you want to do that. So, no one's going to be disadvantaged. It's an entirely up to you when and how you do that, because of course systems might have to change. On that though, in terms of revalidation, we can't comment on universities' own regulations, but we purposely left the 9 core competencies the same so that we didn't envision it would require a full revalidation at this stage. But of course, you obviously need to refer to your own university regulations, but that's kind of our rationale and thinking behind it. As I mentioned, some of them are more explicit and a little bit more expanded, so it's worth having a read. And, for me, in my own, I'll say setting, that's early childhood, isn't it? In my own HEI, that's where I work, isn't it? HEI. I will just go through my modules and I will just double check that I've got everything, that it's really robust and really explicit. And I think what I've already found is that it's there. It's just about making it more explicit. And that's largely, I think you'll all find the same, because it's also those QAA benchmarks which we're meeting anyway. So hopefully we're not expecting masses of changes. So off the back of that, and this was one of the questions that we received, and I know I chatted with Helen Perkins this week, who comes out and does your QAA visits. There is a worry that it's going to be more paperwork, but Helen and I are really keen that it isn't. Paperwork is great, but we definitely don't want paperwork for paperwork's sake. Helen is really passionate that it's about students' knowledge, and we can get that in a range of ways. So we are not expecting to see masses of extra stuff off the back of this. For me, it's about what you're already doing, and just thinking about the new numbering essentially. So e-diaries, reflective accounts, mentor reports, placement observations, assessed work. And Helen also really talks about the strength of that endpoint viva, particularly for if you're having those conversations with students, those critical reflections. Because really it's about what those students know, and we can kind of gather that in a range of ways, but we're certainly not expecting reams and reams of paperwork. What I'd also say is you guys are knowledgeable professionals, and I think sometimes we fall in danger, don't we, of forgetting that, because we think someone's going to come in and kind of check, but actually your students and what they're capable of. So I think I would hold that close as well, would be my sort of top tip, I think. Another question was around mentors. Now, this is a tricky one, and so this is why I wanted to come back to it. Mentors will really matter, particularly if your HEI doesn't want you to go out and observe and you are relying on mentors. So we'll open this up in a little bit, but we do things like mentor drop-ins and welcome sessions, and we also form really close relationships with our settings. But depending on the size of your HEI, how your partnership office works, we know that some of that could be quite tricky. So we'll come back to this question later on, and then if anyone's got any ideas about what they do or things they found really useful, we can share that. But as I say, it is a requirement for HEIs to be responsible and to almost quality assure that. But in fairness, that was always the requirement, but I think it's going to be that mentor thing if HEIs decide to go down that particular route. So off the back of this, quickly, because I'll forget to say it later, what I would urge any of you to do, if you haven't already, is to think about the audit. Now, it sounds really scary because it has the word audit, but it's not. So Helen's absolutely lovely. And I know some of you in the room have had Helen, some of you quite recently. But if you're worried about anything and she's actually just great to look over your paperwork and give you a steer. It's really supportive. And she's got loads of ideas, because Helen is the one that goes out across the country and sees lots of different ways of doing this. So if you are interested and haven't had thank you, Pollyanna. She did say she'd been out. She was very impressed. But it is just a lovely, lovely process. And several years ago when she came to me, I found it brilliant, because it's like, oh, is this quite right? Is that how it should look? And she, lots of ideas and really reassuring. So if you haven't, I'd urge you to email Jo Steele, and we can kind of get those booked in, and she works with you to make a time that is kind of mutually convenient. So highly recommend that. Brilliant supportive process. The other thing we're working on in the background, and we'll keep rolling and rolling, is the ebook. Now, I've put a little link on there, and I'll also drop it in the chat at the end. For the ebook, what we're hoping is that it will be a brilliant resource for students and practitioners. Sorry, HEIs. We're not ECS now. HEIs to click on and to see examples, links to things that are useful. You know, that kind of thing. So we are sort of a bit of a rallying call today as well. If you've got anything, if you've got a brilliant resource that you use with your students, if you've got a recently published journal article that's free to access, anything like that, we'd love to know about it so we can put it into the GPCs and link to the competency that it most relates to. So for example, at the moment, we've got links to things like the Birth to Five Matters, you know, in the parent partnership bit or wherever it links, links to things from the Education Endowment Fund, you know, all of those kind of elements are going in the ebook. The second thing I'm working on is the resource page. I've been trying to kind of get this going for years, and I've emailed a few HEIs yesterday, and I've got a few of you in the room actually that I'm going to contact later today. So if you've got any strong practice examples of your, you know, placement booklets, mentor booklets that you'd like to share, I'm happy to share, because I know from feedback that's the kind of thing that lots of you would find sort of really useful. So we're also trying to get that going. So if you've got anything you think would be great, just let Verity and I know. We're happy. You know, the more we can get, the better. We want this to be, we know you're busy, we want this to be kind of a really, you know, we're all in this together. So as much as we can share, the better. And that is it. So I'm going to close this PowerPoint down, and then we will hand over the floor to questions, although, and I'll stop recording.